And until all that proposition is ready and the moment is there, I don't think they'll pitch up, actually, because they're still getting there.
Do you think, I mean, we've already mentioned the march in Greece, the march in Glasgow relative just before that. Estimates vary about how many people were on it. I would say about 60,000 probably. Still a huge thing. Do you think they are great for the movement? Do you think they alienate people that are not in the movement?
Well, I have to say, I wasn't at the one in Glasgow because I was handing a PhD in that weekend, and I spent a long time looking at the library walls in Dundee University. But I don't know, I think you guys who are on these marches would have a better idea. I mean, I grew up in Northern Ireland, right? And so there's a wee bit of a thing about marches and possession of space and territory and all sorts of stuff, you know. So maybe I've just got a wee instinctive thing there, because I can see what it's like being the outsider in some of these things, because I always was. But from what I could see from the Glasgow one, with the emphasis on fun and music and the drums going and lots of different ethnic groups being able to kind of demonstrate that they're all part of this new Scots, that strikes me as being a spectacle. I have to say, though, that I can remember reading a column, I don't remember who wrote it. It was a very interesting column about being a no voter watching the last Yes March go through Glasgow, and it wasn't tremendously complimentary. But, you know, I think in the middle of all this, we've got to be able to express the exuberance of realising that we're now moving into a new stage of the independence campaign. We've got to be able to do that. And again, I'm not trying to be overly critical of the SNP in its sort of moment of activism, but it would have to be said that at the last election, the SNP were not talking about independence. And actually, right up till now, they're still not really talking about it. So that for a lot of people who are swithering, they need to see someone really believes in this proposition. It'll be far better when there's a political party and a government saying the words over and over again and owning it without apology, with Ruth Davidson right there. Because if you can't do that, why should the rest of the public believe you've got a proposition? We've got to have some political leadership. But in the absence of that, these marches that bring the punters, the civic society, the movement out, show that this is not owned by political parties. And it's really important strength. So, of course, we need to be able to be mobile and learn to be accommodating, jolly, entertaining, come all ye, as we do these things.
Do you think Brexit has the potential to be the trigger for the next independence referendum? And if so, what particular aspect of it?
Richard and I have already discussed this. And Richard thinks Brexit is a kind of killer of a boring sort of trigger thing.
No, I don't. I think some of the debates around the European Parliament are kind of chewy, and I think that the EU referendum, the Remain side, failed to make a passionate case for remaining. Yeah. So I think that doesn't work as a trigger. I think the battle of the parliaments, I think the power grab, and I think the situation that we're currently in does hold that potential.
Yeah. Well. The original, I mean, the Brexit referendum and the campaign leading up to it, I mean, it's strange actually, it was just 2016, but it feels a long time ago now. And actually the plot has thickened. I think you'd need to have been on another planet now not to understand that when you have been integrated fully with something like Europe and have embraced all of its standards and so on, leaving is a different proposition than having decided to join. I mean, you could probably make a reasonable case for saying we should never have joined in the first place. But since we have, you've got an unbelievable amount of difficulty withdrawing when that is still the largest trade bloc. Now, of course, as I'm saying this, can you hear the parallel argument? And that's the one we have to watch. And I would like to see somebody putting some time and effort into the proper rebuttal of this. Because as far as I can understand, and I haven't spent a lot of time on it, it's one thing to think of independence and breaking up a former state, and there's precedent. It's happened a lot, actually, within our lifetimes. The Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia are a pretty good example. There was a fairly straightforward formula that worked that out. However, no one has ever left the EU. There's also precedent about how you divide up even marine assets. It's still happening all over the world. These processes of breakup are fairly natural. The difficulty is leaving a trading bloc. It happens to be the case that there's only 5 countries in the world that are not part of their own regional trading bloc, and one of them is the Congo. So there we have, I wish I could remember them because it would be pretty striking, but it is a couple of the poorest countries in the world in Africa and Britain. And that's the weirdness of where we are, because it's almost a sort of self-denying ordinance that we're in now. And it's that, I think there's a lot of mileage in that, because the Scots are naturally connective people. We're not pretty naturally, we like the idea that we're in something larger as well. You know, not like it's a blank check, but we recognise that, you know, there is no such thing as being a splendidly isolated state on your own with delusions of empire and imperial grandeur. That's why we're in this room. You know, pushing back against the ridiculousness of this exclusive, special notion of Britain that has isolated us. I mean, coming back through airports, you know, because you'll have done it, you know that you're the ones that are en route to the kind of, you know, the most distant terminal where only the people that think they're so special that they can't be in Schengen go. That's us. We're so special. Well, any movement that is existing to try and question an existing reality always takes a more liberal and benign view, because that's why they exist. So it strikes me that there's an awful lot to be said about the idea that we want to be Europeans. And then the thing I've been interested in is saying, well, there's actually a lot of different ways you can do that. And without kind of necessarily getting into this, if you didn't want to, but you need to stop me fast.
I do want to, but in 5 minutes, but however, pave the way.
Well, you see, the thing is, it may well be boring to sort of talk about the Brexit thing, but having come back from Iceland, let's look up, let's get our peckers up here a wee bit, because we're going to be an independent country. The question is, what kind of country? And what kind of connections and place in Europe do we want? And do you know the brilliant thing? Is that lots of small, successful independent states have already done it for us. They've spent 40 years finding out the best things for them. And what you discover when you go around them is they have a very clear idea of what is in the interests of their nation, then they fight like hell to get it. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, even when you're amongst like-minded folks. So, for example, the Icelanders, where I've just come from, took one look at the EU common fishery policy. When they had the possibility to join, 93% of their income comes from fish, and they just went, nah, we're not joining that. There's nothing could make them join the common fisheries policy. So that was in their interest to do that. Finland, right at the other extent of all of this, absolutely, it's the firmest and most enthusiastic member of the EU for one reason, Russia. You know, it's said very often that being a Scot in respect of England is like being in bed with an elephant. And this is not to be uncharitable about our English cousins, it's just a size thing. If that's true, then the Finns are like being in bed with a stegosaurus, because Russia is constantly on the offensive, actually. So the Finns have taken the decision that they have a constitutional bar on membership of NATO. And the reason for that is to say to Russia, look, you didn't need to invade us. We will never, ever, ever have an American base on our soil. Now, if you've done that, where's your foreign policy? Where's your support? It's the EU. And that's the reason that the Finns are the most firm supporters of the EU, and they're the only ones in the euro. When you go around all these countries, they've all started to figure out what is in their interests as countries, and they then act accordingly. This is the conversation Scotland needs to have. Because when you've figured out what it is that you're looking for as a country in life, it's an awful lot easier to decide. Should we be full members of the EU? For sure, 62% of us voted for that. But there's also the option of the halfway house that Norway and Iceland are in, which allows you not much power, but not to have the common agricultural or fisheries policies implemented here. You could have a longer conversation about whether that really matters to us. It obviously doesn't matter as much as it does to Norway and Iceland, because fishing isn't as large a part of our economy. But that's the conversation we need to have. And then the beauty of the whole thing is that we have friends. Everywhere I've been, people have goodwill towards Scotland. The halfway house members will say, I've just come back from making the second nation film on Iceland, and the Icelanders are saying, you're a perfect fit for us. In fact, we would be a big catch for them. Iceland has 335,000 people. The Faroes has 50,000 people. These are small, small countries who are holding at bay the predatory nature of America and Russia in the Arctic on behalf of the whole world. And they need support from small, progressive, northern-facing North Atlantic states. And it's our destiny to wake up and realise that the direction of travel for us is very probably to look north now and to stop being obsessed with what's happening south.
We'll talk some more about that.